Okay, let's get going. I'd like to call the January 21st, 2020 regular meeting of the West Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency to order. Good morning and Happy New Year, everyone. We're meeting this morning by live teleconference pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order N29-20 to reduce the spread of COVID-19. Members of the public have been asked to participate in the meeting by live stream and to have submitted comments in writing to the meeting by the clerk by 8 a.m. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Okay, Chair Ramos.
Here.
Director Ledesma.
Here.
Director Alcala.
Here.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, did you hear me?
Sorry. Oh, okay. All are present.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. We'll move on to the regular agenda. First item was presentation by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of WSAFCA. Has there been any matters submitted? Oh, no public comment on this agenda item, so we'll move to item 1B, report out on closed session. Council.
Good morning, Chair Ramos. The board met on the 3 items listed on the closed session agenda. On items 1 and 2, the board received an update on pending and potential litigation and took no reportable action. On the 3rd item, with respect to the acquisition of real property, the board met with its negotiator and authorized the commencement by staff of negotiation of potential acquisition of property rights along the I Street project corridor, as more specifically identified in the closed session agenda.
Okay, thank you. Consent agenda. 1 item, which is consideration and approval of our November 19th, 2020 meeting minutes. I'll remind everyone we did not have a December meeting, so these are the minutes from our previous regular meeting.
I'm sorry. I do need to report out on the monthly revenue and expenditures for November 2020.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I went over that.
Yeah, we skipped item 1C.
Yeah, sorry. Go right ahead, Jen.
All right, sorry about that. So I'll be reporting out on revenue and expenditures for November 2020. In our State Advance Holding Fund, Fund 257, we received an advance amount of $3.365 million. And our O&M Fund 870, the beginning balance was approximately $3.43 million. The agency received $9.4 thousand in revenue and expended $23.8 thousand, making the ending cash position to be $3.42 million. And our CIP Fund 871, the starting balance was approximately negative $1.84 million. Revenue was $2.18 million. The majority of that amount was transferred from Fund 257 for quarter 37.2 and 37.3, which is August and September of 2020. Expenditures totaled $835,000, and the ending cash position for Fund 871 was negative $492.3 thousand. Looking at the year-to-date position, the combined cash position among Funds 257, 870, and 871 was $4.96 million. As of January 13th of this year, the cash position was approximately $4.33 million. The direct billed flood assessments were also mailed out in November last year, and comparing fiscal years 2019-2020, the amount increased by 1.1%. And staff is working with state right now for a partial retention release in the amount of $7.1 million. And we hope to get that amount arriving in February 2021, which is next month. With that, I conclude my, do you have any questions for me?
Is there any questions on the board for Jen?
Nope.
Thank you.
Okay, keep working with the state and get that retention. Now we'll move on to our next regular item, which was the approval of the November 19th, 2020 minutes on the consent agenda.
Yeah,
And,
Mr. Chair, I'm gonna go ahead and move unless there's further comment on it.
No, and I will second since Norma has just come on, so it'll be hard to review in detail. Would you call the roll on the consent item?
Okay. Chair Ramos,
Aye.
Director Ledesma,
Aye.
and so do I just say that the consent agenda motioned with a 2-to-1 approval?
Well, no,
No, yeah, I think call the full roll.
yeah,
Full roll, okay.
Yeah.
Director Alcala,
I have not seen it, so I'm not sure if there should be an abstention or just an agreement with, I guess with
You can
parliamentary procedure, I will approve.
you can vote present like they do in the legislature.
You can abstain if you'd like.
I think in
Okay.
this case, I have to abstain because I have not seen it. Okay, thank you.
If you haven't seen it.
thank you.
Okay, that carries.
Carries.
On to our regular agenda, item 3. There's been a request to continue this item to our next meeting. Greg, do you want to add anything to that, or?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Ramos. So in the absence of federal construction funding and New Start, this particular action represented by item number 3 is a bit premature, as it turns out now. So we'd like to continue that to a future date, not necessarily next month, it would be nice, but let's continue it to a future board when it is more appropriate and there's more certainty with state funding and a New Start for construction. I mean, it's got federal funding.
Okay. Do we need a motion and a vote to continue it?
You should, Chair Ramos, you should propose a motion to drop item number 3 from the agenda and bring it back at a later meeting, subject to full future agenda reporting and as a new item.
Okay. I will make such said motion to
I'll second.
continue this item and to bring back under another form if necessary when needed. And it was seconded by Norma. So would you take the roll?
Chair Ramos,
Aye.
Director Ledesma,
Aye.
Director Alcala,
Aye.
motion carried unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. On to item 4A, Floodplain Restoration Project Update. Time oil site closure, I assume that's Paul?
That's right. I'm going to share my, Jenny, you need to let me share. I'm going to do these in reverse order. So I'm going to start off with the time oil remediation and closure project.
Paul, not to speed you through this, but please be mindful of the director's time constraints.
I've been through that before too. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to present to you a little bit about time oil today. Let's get this thing rolling. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
All right, so long before West Sacramento was a city, there was a bulk terminal site, petroleum tank farm located at the intersection of Linden Road and South River Road. That intersection no longer exists, but this bulk terminal site operated between approximately 1952 and 1975. During geotechnical investigations, BCI came across petroleum odors from some sampling activities. WSAFCA had an environmental consultant under contract who had just completed a corridor study and identified places for other future investigations. Now, a lot of times when we get this kind of news, we're not sure where it's going to go and how long this is going to take. But the fact of the matter is that we had a levee project that was in design. At this time, it was about 65% design, if I'm correct, in 2012. And we were trying to move this along and still negotiating on a setback levy. So, as I said, BCI discovered some odorous soils. This is just after we had an environmental consultant on board. SCS Engineers was conducting a corridor study, and this was not identified as one of the places where there might be contamination. So we did have SCS put together a plan, a 3-step plan for sampling. So the stage 1 was soil sampling at all the potential places that was a potential release. So all of the tanks had, we did individual soil borings down to about 25 feet. Then stage 2, we did on a grid pattern, we did another 35 borings over the site, as well as 8 groundwater, temporary groundwater sampling wells along the levee south of the site, just to see if there was migration downriver from where the potential contamination release was. Through those investigations, what we were able to come out was there was no evidence of contamination at grade. However, there were high concentrations of volatile organic compounds near the land side toe of the existing levee. And it came up with a recommendation to continue to monitor, but also to, if we were going to remediate, to excavate and then treat with some chemicals so that any remaining product below the ground surface could be treated over time. We had SCS Engineers produce a cost estimate for remediation. And we also, through their investigations, identified Time Oil as the likely responsible party. So we hired an environmental attorney to try to compel Time Oil to remediate the site. And we had to work with them to ensure that it was not going to conflict with the project schedule. Now you see that we've advanced to 2016. At this time, we were really close to 90% design. We knew we were building we were fairly certain we were building a setback levee. And so it was important to try to incorporate this work along with the construction work that was being planned for the next couple of years. And then in 2017, Time Oil declares bankruptcy. So as we've been working through this process, we've been working with the environmental consultant that the Time Oil company had hired. We've been working with the Regional Water Quality Control Board to get the necessary permissions to proceed. We find out that they're not going to actually continue with work. That leaves it back to the agency because now we're, like I said, we're in 2017 and work is beginning. We had installed 4 monitoring wells. And so for the good part of 2017, we were conducting testing. We were trying to discern how deep, how contaminated the soil was. Because of the bankruptcy filing by TOC Holdings, we hired a bankruptcy attorney in Seattle, and we ultimately filed a claim in bankruptcy court for $660,000. Now to implement this plan, We started off with some test pits. This is right at the base of the levee. We had already gone through a public process to notify that we were conducting this work. We had also, SCS was not just kept on retainer. We actually did an RFP for another environmental consultant to oversee this. SCS was selected by a multidisciplinary team to oversee and ensure that the work was completed. This is just a graphic to kind of give you an idea about where the contamination was and the extent of the excavations that we were undertaking during the levee project. So at this time, the project design was to build a setback levee. However, we had to hold off until the setback levee was sufficiently constructed because we were going to excavate into the existing levee as it was at that day. Ultimately, we removed, let's see, it was 7 to 8 feet of overburden and set that aside, and then excavated to a depth of about 22 feet until we hit groundwater. We removed, I believe it was, I don't remember exactly what the count was. It was near 20,000 cubic yards of contaminated soil to a disposal site. And then we had 2 excavation pits, one in the north, one in the south. This is all why work is continuing on the setback levee behind us. Ultimately, we got down, we believe that we removed a lot of the source. We coordinated our efforts with both the Central Valley Flood Protection Board and the Army Corps of Engineers because we were excavating into the levee. That soil was replaced. The pits were all filled and brought back to grade. And then we installed groundwater monitoring wells, 3 up on the levee, as well as 1 in the new offset area, the O&M core of the offset area. That monitoring went on. We had 3 monitoring events between 2019 and the end of last year, all of which determined that there were no more chemicals of concern of any significance. We got a lot of non-detects, very low thresholds. And so then we solicited from the Regional Water Quality Board closure. We abandoned the wells in just before the flood season began. During our we also put out a 60-day notice that this work was being done and completed in accordance with the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And we have finally finished this work. The Regional Water Quality Control Board is waiting for our closure report. They received no comments during the public comment period. And this site will be closed before the end of the calendar year. Are there any questions on this?
Hey, Paul, it's Chris. Thank you for the report. I'm sorry, at the beginning, when did this first get discovered?
2012.
So I just want to thank you for this enormous amount of work. I know this was kind of going on nearby, so but the scope of it really hasn't been, thanks to your illustrative PowerPoint today, kind of walking through it in hindsight for the past 8 years. I know it's been a lot of work, but appreciate all the effort to kind of keep on this and winding your way through finding the oil company that left this behind. And it's just, when you look back at these kind of efforts, it's amazing how much work went into these. And so thank you. I just want to say thank you for this.
One thing I failed to mention that I want to make sure that the board understands is that this has not come at a great cost to WSAFCA. When we did hire SCS engineers, they put us in touch with the what's called the Site Cleanup Account Program through the State Water Board. We did apply for funds. We were awarded $784,000 and we spent $650,000 of that to remediate this site. So by and large, this has been paid for by grant funds, and any other additional funds that we've already expended, we hope to recover through the bankruptcy.
That's great.
So Paul, if the bankruptcy claim comes through, does that pay back some of the grant money, or what's the process? We can't. I don't assume we can make money on this deal, but
no, we can't make money on the deal. But what we will, so we will put the claim up against what money we received from the grant program. We will pay for our costs that we incurred that were not paid for by the grant program, and then remit the remaining funds, if there are any, back to the state.
okay. Very good. Any other questions? If not, let's move on to the plant project.
All right, one more.
Mr. Chair, at this point, I'm going to have to leave for in a few minutes to another meeting. Just want to make sure you had the heads up on that.
Oops. Hold on a second. Last minute changes. All right. Floodplain Restoration 2021. So just to recall, the mitigation areas are mitigating for the Southport project, specifically the loss of waters and open, as well as mixed riparian and emergent marsh. And we're also mitigating for some of Village Parkway. And with what remains, we hope to be able to mitigate for future federal projects. Oops. Oops. Sorry, just jumping around a little bit. All right, so at the end of last year, I said to you, these are the things that we were looking to accomplish in 2020. I'm happy to announce that we've achieved all of these. So first of all, pole cuttings and tules were planted in the wetland areas at the beginning of 2020. You can see the little flags with the different notices, the different places that they were. You may have noticed during the year, if you were out there, that there were milk cartons that were put on around all of the plants. This is to facilitate the contractor's ability to do herbicide application broadly from the back of a gator. It was highly successful and really kept down the weeds this year. If you went out anytime in the late summer, you know that all we saw was really the plants that we've had put in place. So some of the other things that were completed as part of the work this year, River Partners did conduct the census. We did identify a number of voids where plants were not producing, were not taking off. We had replantings available, and we have that in our budget to deal with the loss of plants or plant morbidity. So we did do replantings to the tune of about another 1,800 plants were installed that we had lost. And towards the end of the season, native grasses were also sown throughout the project area. And if you go out there now, you'll see a little bit of grass growing, but it's not very much yet because we haven't had any water. But in the next couple of weeks, we'll see what happens. So even though they put in the milk cartons, because at the end of the season, we had required the contractor to remove those just in case the entire site becomes inundated, and we didn't want all that trash floating downriver. So that was a requirement of ours, and they complied with that, as well as did everything necessary to clean up the sites for the flood season. Fish screens and irrigation were removed. And we received our first annual vegetation report. This was completed by River Partners. Gives a good overview of what was measured, how well the plant growth is in the first year of actual establishment period, And then this report is working its way into a broader MMRP report, Mitigation Monitoring and Reporting Program report that's being done by GEI, not yet ready for prime time. I had talked with you about the mitigation crediting agreement over the last 6 months or so. I'm happy to report that this month, GEI did submit a draft mitigation crediting agreement to CDFW for a draft review. So we're waiting to hear back from them. I don't anticipate you're going to find out anything about that review in the immediate future, but we should know more in the next couple of months. Our next meeting with them is scheduled in a week.
Okay.
And that concludes my presentation. That's what we did what we set out to accomplish. And we really are moving into the establishment period. Going to be a lot more maintenance, not nearly as intensive. Irrigation will continue for the next 2 to 3 years. At that point, we hope that the plants are significantly established so that river partners can transition out and we would transition in a potential land manager. And that concludes my report.
Paul?
Okay.
Paul, would you mind providing just a brief introduction to the board on the long-term management and how that's, you know, the options that we're looking at to fund that?
Right.
And let them know that we'll likely be coming back to them.
So in November, I believe even in October, I started talking a little bit about the fact that some of our permit requirements look to have an endowment set up for paying for the long-term maintenance and management of the offset areas. So I've been looking at the requirements through the MCA, which also has an endowment requirement. We look back at some of the work that was done for the GRR. And then the permitting that happened for Southport also leads us in that same direction. Greg has asked that I look into the idea, or in our project team, our expanded team, into the possibility of doing something where we would dedicate a portion of the flood assessment for long-term maintenance and management. So I'm in the process of going through that analysis and speaking with the various agencies who put those permit requirements in place about how much flexibility that we actually have to be able to pay for that requirement without setting up an endowment. So stay tuned. It's a lot of legwork because many of these agencies are very accustomed to using an endowment and are not always sympathetic to a change in SOP.
I hear that, but I think that it's well worth pursuing. I assume WSAFCA has similar requirements, particularly in the Thomas and what they've set up. And I don't know if they've gone the endowment route, but they have a similar assessment that can fund these things, you know, long term. I think it's definitely worth pursuing. I think the argument to these folks is an endowment that's negotiated now may not necessarily be sufficient in the future. And this is a more secure funding source long term. So you know, we're going to be here. We know that. So keep at it.
And Paul, what are we looking at for an order of magnitude for an endowment if we were forced to go down that path? Is it on the order of like about $2 million or so?
So the initial, we did have an outside agency do an initial evaluation of the maintenance requirements and what an endowment amount might be. It's about $3.2 million to set it up. That would take into consideration not only mitigation and maintenance, but the fact that there is an easement holder and potentially a reserve fund for catastrophic events such as over inundation, a fire, or some other strange act that would happen in the mitigation area. So we will try to factor that into the whole idea of paying through an assessment versus paying for an endowment, and try to bring that back to the board next month.
And then for a broader context, as we enter into the federal project civil works program with the Corps, our cost share on project implementation is roughly 10%. And so, having to squirrel away $3.5 million into an endowment represents a $35 million project that we could otherwise construct and or make levee improvements with. So it's a significant financial burden to the agency in a sense to have to use an endowment. So that's another angle that we're trying to, or another argument, if you will, that we're trying to impress upon these agencies is that the endowment is rather onerous, and it can inhibit our ability to make meaningful, flood risk reduction improvements. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Thanks, Paul.
You're very welcome.
I guess we have just a few minutes left before Norma has to move on, so I'll just hand it over to you, Greg. Go through the WSAFCA updates.
Yeah, and I think we've really hit on most of the highlights with the exception of the federal project. So I'm going to focus on that. Let's start with the federal funding. I think everybody's been contacted in one way or another by somebody or another. Much to our disappointment, we did not receive a construction new start and construction funding as all the indications pointed to in the 2021 core work plan. The intel that we've received thus far is that there were some last minute changes made by the outgoing administration. Whether they focused on California or other Democratic states, we don't really know. But the bottom line is our project's funding and the new start was removed, and it appears that those new starts and the funding was allocated to other projects. This was, our plan A for receiving funding was whatever vehicle showed up as soon as possible to give us construction funding and a new start, we were going to take advantage of. Earlier in 2020, there was talk of an infrastructure package, and we were looking to maybe use that as a vehicle to get our new start construction funding. Both sides of the House couldn't agree. That got delayed. The work plan showed up as the next vehicle. We know how that turned out. But now there's a new administration, and there's continued talk about pushing out an infrastructure stimulus package, whether it's a broader COVID relief package or not. Nevertheless, there's a significant push to get something out soon, possibly within the next 30 to 60 days. We're going to keep tracking that. So that now becomes our focus for the most near-term possibility for construction funding and a new start. Now, if we look at what the House had proposed in the appropriate energy and water appropriations bill, was something on the order of like $26 billion as a separate chapter on the appropriations bill for civil works projects. Obviously, that didn't make it through to the final bill, but it is an indication of what, at least on the House side, democratically controlled, what they're looking to invest in core programs to get construction and help stimulate the economy. So we're very hopeful that some stimulus package will have something along those lines. That may give the opportunity to not only provide a new start for WSAC, but a much bigger allocation of federal funds than we otherwise would have seen in the work plan. In discussions with core district staff as well as division staff, early on in 2020, when there was discussion about a stimulus package, they were requested to provide projects and funding, and we have it on pretty good accord that they recommended well over $100 million for the West Sacramento project in such a bill. And so we're going to continue to have conversations with the Corps, and we're going to push for the biggest allocation we can get up to the full core allocation of about $650 million. I think that's our, the big ask. And then obviously we'll take whatever we can get, but we would push for up to that full allocation of the $650 million. And I'll keep the board updated as things progress and as we hear about the administration's plans. In the meantime, yeah.
No, keep going, keep going.
Okay,
I just have some comments when you're done with that.
All right. So in the meantime, we're still wrapping up the first increment, the Yolo Bypass East Levee project. We're in comment review on the 95% comment review and response for the 95% plan set. That should be wrapped up in the next couple, 2, maybe 3 weeks, in which case we'll close out all the comments and be able to give the Corps essentially and submit the 100% or final plan set. Beyond that, in terms of the plans and what happens, really the Corps really can't do anything else with those plans, issue their real estate, letters, they call them take letters, and they can't turn it over to the contracting office to start teeing it up for bid until a PPA is executed, the project partnership agreement. And that cannot be executed until there is a new start awarded for WSAC. So we'll be giving them the 100% plans. They will sit on the shelf, if you will, until such time as a PPA is executed, and then we'll pick up the ball and keep rolling with it. We will be looking to complete the environmental update associated with Yolo Bypass. So Mark's leading that effort. We're looking at a public meeting towards the end of this month, maybe the first week of February. If all goes well, we'll be bringing an item to the board in February or March, but we're targeting February for certification of the CEQA documents, which looks to be a mitigated negative declaration. And that's for the slight changes in this project as compared to what the GRR had envisioned. So that's going along roughly on schedule, a little bit behind, but in the absence of the federal funding, not a big deal at this point. And then beyond that, the Corps, because we led design with primarily our dollars and the state's dollars, the Corps still has a relatively decent balance now that the 2021 appropriations bill was passed. They have $2 million, which they can continue to spend on design activities. So I'll be meeting with some of the the district leadership folks next Tuesday to talk about the plan forward. We had always envisioned that we would turn over this project to the Corps to construct, and then we would start leading additional design activities on the next increment, which is Sac River North. We don't see that changing. We see we'll continue to do that. However, the Corps is limited by their funding on, their current funding and how much they can participate. So we're going to try and work through the best way to sort through that with them past Yolo Bypass. So I'll be reporting back on those efforts, in the coming months. We're developing scopes of work now, which we were going to put in front of the Corps to get their review and concurrence with, which we would then put out to our consultants, bring items back to the board to propose to award contracts and move out on geotechnical investigations, surveying, land net, that type of stuff. All right, I'm going to pause there. So that's sort of all things federal project.
Okay. Director Akala, if you're still on, do you have any questions or? Well, then I just a few comments, Greg, towards the infrastructure package or whatever. When you said 26 billion, you're talking about for core civil works, or was that?
Yeah, it was core civil. It was that's an enormous amount. It was across all of their mission areas. And so a little over a third of that, or roughly a third of that, at that time was eligible for flood projects. So it was, in the $7 to $9 billion.
Okay,
Excuse me,
well
I'm
then,
sorry. I'm sorry. I was just going to let you know I am still on. I apologize. I'm actually driving now, but I'm listening to the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Well, I'm just trying to remember back to the supplemental in 2018
Yeah.
and how that went through. We were in that game as well, and you know, didn't come to fruition. Couple of things with that, the you know, whether or not there's an opportunity this time to have more of an earmark process, so you're actually, you know, nailed down from the beginning. Because if I remember right, it went through similar to the work plan process.
That's right.
After the
That's
fact.
exactly right.
And so, you know, how it's structured this time would be very important for us to make sure we get it. Otherwise, we're going to be in the, you know, same ball game again. And I remember that once those monies were handed out, and in the instance of SAFCA, they got basically full funding for the Common Features project. The idea there was this is an opportunity to fully fund something so that we can free up ongoing appropriations. So, you know, I think your idea of asking for the full amount, we gotta stay with it, because, you know, if they give us your, you know, a couple $100 million, then, you know, how do you get on the, you know, process to make sure you're funded going out? So, I mean, you know all this stuff, but I'm
yeah. I think the most important thing that could come out of the infrastructure package would be a new start, and that gets us into that continuing pipeline should it be needed. Then the second best thing that could come out of it is the maximum amount of funding we can possibly get for the project. And that does two things. One, it gives certainty that the Corps is going to be able to participate, you know, without any hiccups to complete the project. But it also provides the ability for the Corps to fund their credit obligation, you know, associated with Southport early. Under a $30 or to $50 million annual appropriations, where we want to use Southport credit, that money now, rather than that being their share, becomes their share and our share. And so the project ends up being smaller in size if they're footing the whole bill, if you will. And so we would certainly like to see a large allocation up front, up to the max, so that we can then utilize that credit as early in the project implementation as we can. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the next comment is you know, barring this special infrastructure package, if it, you know, gets dragged down and who knows what, 2022 budget, we've got all of our PD funding.
That's right.
Is there a means for us to get additional funds in the budget without a new start? Or are we just going to have to wait till something's passed and the work plan is put together?
So unless there's a earmark or pseudo earmark provision that is allowed for 2022, then we'll be relegated to the work plan process. And I don't believe the Corps can receive any additional PED fundings. I think the footnote from our 21 appropriation was, here's the money, go complete design. And so I don't think they're going to get anything else under investigation account in the 2022 appropriations bill. So earmark would be a way to do it.
Okay. Okay. Well, we got our work cut out for us.
Yeah.
Continue on.
Now, you know, again, big picture, this presumably, unless something happens very quickly, like within the next 2 months with infrastructure stimulus package that gets us a new start, it's going to be very difficult. Well, it will be impossible for us to go to construction this year on Yola Bypass. So that's going to get, you know, could get pushed to next year, puts us another year behind schedule in terms of actual construction. So for us to be able to complete our program, complete all of the improvements, provide 200-year level of protection by 2025, again, is becoming a much bigger lift, as each year goes by. So to that end, there is legislation now being proposed that the city is carrying to look for a legislative extension for West Sacramento to achieve that 200-year level of protection, similar to what SAFCA had received last year. So I'll keep you updated on that progress as well.
Sounds good. Okay, that's all I have on that. Is there, I guess, continue on if there's anything else in the update?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay. Item 4C, director's comments. I don't know, Norma, you're driving, if you have anything you need to add today, but
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to be really brief because I have a temporary flow right now before I get to Bruce Hill Road. Thank you so much, everyone, for the updates. So obviously, I feel a little like I'm drinking sort of out of a fire hose right now. So I would like to ask perhaps if I could get some minutes sent to me from this meeting so that I can report out when we do have our city council meetings. And when COVID hopefully passes, I am very much interested in perhaps just taking a quick tour of the areas that that have been cleaned up, by the engineers who are out there doing that.
absolutely. I think they'll. I was going to say absolutely. I'm sure the staff be happy to give you a tour when you have the ability to do it. And like you said, if you need more input, in the near future or before our next meeting with our council on some of the other issues, feel free to set that up through Greg, and we'll get you up to speed. We're happy to have you on board. One comment that I have, Greg, we set up our meeting times based on Bab's situation with her other meetings, and we moved our meeting up to an earlier time, a couple of years ago. It's fine with me, but if it works better with, the different time with the other directors, I know Chris seems to have stuff that comes along fairly early on these Thursdays. Perhaps we can find a better time. I think the date that we have works, but there's another time that works. Let's consider it. So I'll just kind of leave that in your guys' hands to kind of survey and see what may work best, or we just stay with what we have.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
I'll poll the various board members. Well, the other two board members. I know your I know that your availability. But I'll poll the other board members, and we'll see if there's a time that may work a little better.
Yeah, and I guess to consider eventually we may be back at City Hall, so at some point, so it'll be available there too.
Yeah. Greg, this time was actually fine for me. Just wanted to let you know. It's just that I didn't know I was going to have this meeting today because our mayor, made the appointments last night, and my mom, her shot was today. As a matter of fact, that's where we're on our way. But this time is fine with me, just to let you know. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. If there's nothing else, we will adjourn. Thank you all.
Right.
Everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.